Ready? أخير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. Inshallah, this evening we'll shed some light on a violent beginning of a new year. We have seen events unfolding in Yemen, in Iran, Venezuela, and we'll touch upon the latest in Gaza. Now, for Yemen, Yemen used to be two Yemens, and the north used to have Sana'a as its capital, and the southern Yemen used to have Aden as its capital. And in the beginning of the 90s, there was an agreement to join and to have one Yemen. There were some events, but eventually it stood to be one Yemen. Until we have events, or I should say the start of the events that led to where we are now, come during the so-called Arab Spring. Because Ali Abdullah Saleh ruled Yemen from that point when the Yemen joined until the beginning of this Arab Spring. He tried to hold to the power. At one point he realized that it will be difficult for him to hold to power. So he decided a trick. The trick was he gonna give Yemen to be ruled by a group called Al-Houthis. And after a while, his plan was to gather forces, because Yemen is a tribal society, gather forces and come back and take over the government from the Houthis. What had happened is he tried to leave Sana'a. Basically, he gave the capital to the Houthis without a fight. He gave them even the weapons in this regard. And eventually, the Houthis took over Sana'a. Ali Abdullah Saleh tried to flee Sana'a to gather his forces, come back, and they captured him and they killed him in southern Sana'a. So that was the end of a rulership that lasted for more than 25 years of Ali Abdullah Saleh. So who are the Houthis? The Houthis is a group of Zaydis, and for those who attended the Usul al-Fiqh class, Zaydis believe in the Imamat, but they do not believe that the Imam is infallible like the Shi'at. So they are the closest to the Sunni Islam. They believe anybody who defends the deen can be an Imam. They respect Abu Bakr, Umar, Aisha, and the rest of the Sahaba, and hold them in high regard in this regard. So they are not really what we hear from the Ithnay Ashara Shi'at in this regard. They used to play a role sometimes supported by the Saudis against Ali Abdullah Saleh, and sometimes Ali Abdullah Saleh would support them to make trouble at the borders. Eventually, Iran got on board, and Iran started supporting the Houthis. By the time that the Houthis enter Sana'a, basically Iranians were the main support for the Houthis. So after the killing of Ali Abdullah Saleh, Saudi decided to invade Yemen and liberate Yemen from the Houthis. And they gave the impression that this thing is a quick endeavor. 3-4 weeks, we will get rid of the Houthis. That endeavor lasted for many years. And after about 5-6 years, they came to the realization that they cannot defeat the Houthis. Now, mind you, it was not the Saudis only that they are involved in the fighting, because the Saudis do not have a strong army. Yeah, I mean, the Saudi have a strong air force. They keep buying tens of billions of dollars of weapons, but their army is really very, very weak. So they were not fighting the Houthis with Saudi army. They were fighting the Houthis with basically mercenaries coming from the army in Sudan. They were giving the government of Sudan $5,000 a month for each soldier. They also brought air force from Morocco. Now, you tell me, how do we know this Morocco? Because Al-Houthis were able to down an F-15 flight that was basically the captain of it was a Moroccan, and the plane was a Moroccan. So we knew that Morocco also was involved. Saudi tried to get Pakistan involved, and Pakistan said, no, we will not get involved in the fighting, but if needed, we will defend the Saudi regime and the country in this regard. When the Saudis declare war, they got with them on their side the Gulf countries, United Arab Emirates and Qatar. They sent some troops. It was not really a huge number because anyway they do not have large numbers. As you know, the Emirates is basically they have 11% of the population. The rest are people from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Egypt and Palestine and so on and so forth, and Britain and the US. So at one point, the ruler of Saudi, King Salman, became very ill and not much doing. So his son became in charge. And he was like in his early 30s. And who was his mentor for a while? It was the ruler of United Arab Emirates, Ibn Zayed. And Ibn Zayed is almost double the age of Ibn Salman. So he was really treating him as if a naive person, do this, don't do this, and basically as if he's running the show even with this young prince. At one point, Saudi started waking up to a reality that the Emirates have their own agenda in Yemen. Now, what is important about Yemen? If you imagine the map, you have an entrance from the Red Sea to the Arab Sea, Bahr al-Arab. That entrance is called Bab al-Mandab. It controls a huge amount of trade for the world. And we have seen during the Gaza events and the fight over Gaza and genocide in Gaza that the Houthis in Sana'a, they are in control of a big chunk of the population, not a big chunk of the land. The land remain, as we discussed a little later, in the hands of others. But the Houthis control about 50% of the population, which are mostly Sunni Muslims. Now, when the Houthis start sending their missiles against the Zionists, at that point, some forces from Yemen said, we are not going to fight the Houthis. As long as they are supporting the Palestine issue, as long as they're supporting Gaza against the Zionists, we are not going to fight the Houthis. So the Houthis were safe from inner fighting. But there was something else brewing on the other side in southern Yemen. In southern Yemen, there is the so-called Shar'i government, the legal government. That legal government has absolutely, positively no say. The Saudis get it to move by remote control. Absolutely, they have no power. It's whatever the Saudi says, they will do. Go right, go right. Go left, go left. So the so-called Shari'i government in Yemen control not much of the land, but it's recognized by the UN and the Arab League and this as the government. There was another force that the Emirates have established in Yemen, and they put so much money and weapons to support them. So-called the Majlis Intiqali, the transition team that was basically belonged to and influenced totally by the United Arab Emirates. Now, what the United Arab Emirates want, what the Saudi wants, what Houthis want, what everybody wants, is to have control over this area because it's very, very strategic. As we said, so much of the world oil and merchandise go through Bab al-Mandab. And if the Yemenis come and say, we're gonna stop any ship, they can really basically put a halt to this passage. And we have seen that the US, even under Trump, who always talk about power and this and this and that the US have to cut a deal with the Houthis that don't attack American ship, we will not attack you. And they left the Israelis to deal with the Houthis themselves. You remember this, we discussed it before. Because basically at one point, the US bombed al-Houthis a few times, but eventually realized it's not gonna do any good because the Houthis really do not care. There's not much infrastructure, there's not much this, and they were gaining popularity in the world for their support of Gaza. So the US cut a deal with the Houthis, we will not bomb you, you do not stop American ships, you do not stop British ships. As for the Israeli ships, do whatever you want. And that's really what got Netanyahu very, very upset and irritated in this regard. So as of a few weeks ago, the reality on the ground was as follows. There are 4 different entities that control Yemen. We have the Houthis, who control the capital Sana'a, and they control other small areas, but basically they have the bulk of the population, about 50% of Yemen under the Houthis. Then there is the Shari'i government, so-called Shari'i government, the legal government, which again is Saudis control it by remote control, and the president used to be living in Riyadh at the time of Hadi, and then Hadi was replaced by a new face. But basically, they do not have really much say because the Saudis pay their salaries, pay the salaries of those who are fighting on their side in this regard. The third entity is this transitional Majlis group in the south, which have talked about separating the south from the north, that they want to establish an entity in the south, just like in the old days, and have Aden as its capital. There's a 4th small group that control part of the ocean, let's say, they are not really big chunk of land, but they control part of this coast of Yemen, and they are belonging to the nephew of Ali Abdullah Saleh. He is in control of that. So those are the 4 entities that control Yemen, land in Yemen, and some political clout depends on who is behind them. What happened recently is suddenly this southern group, which is supported by the United Arab Emirates, attacked and took over 2 main sections of Yemen, large areas that are rich in oil. One is called Hadramaut, and if you remember the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he mentioned Hadramaut, that this ummah will have safety until somebody will travel from Hadramaut. So that was mentioned in that. This area of Hadramaut in the south, and Mahra, which is another area, they took over it. Again, Saudis did not, do much in terms of action. Of course, they became alarmed. And when there was some movements in those areas toward the Saudi borders, suddenly we heard that the Saudi Air Force have bombed 2 ships that were in the borders in the south with full of weapons and trucks to be used by the Southerners. At that point, the Saudis, of course, said that those 2 ships hide where they came from. They turned off signals. But with technology, even common people who have the talent, they can trace it. And it turns out that they came from Al Fujairah port in the Emirates. And the Saudis basically told them, evacuate, we're gonna hit. And they did hit those 2 ships. And then they issue a warning. Within 24 hours, the Emirates have to leave Yemen. And the president, the Shari president, so-called Shari president, just repeated what the Saudis said, that the Emiratis have to leave Yemen. Now, at one point in the conflict, Qatar pulled out of the alliance. United Arab Emirates also pulled out of the alliance. But Qatar did not really have much of a support or influence, but the Emirates have influence over the south, and some elements of the Emirates remain, so they asked them to leave. And in the past 24 hours or 36 hours, basically the forces that are loyal to the Shari government took over Hadramaut and Al-Mahra, the bulk of those areas, and it looks like the Emirates got the message that the Saudis are very serious in this regard. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Yemen, when asked about the US, he said the US does not care about Yemen as long as the Houthis do not bomb Israel. Deal with it, basically. Trump have other, things to deal with, so they left it to the Houthis, the Saudis, to deal with it, and that's basically where things stand at this point. Yemen, as we said, is very, very important in its strategic position. Al Houthis so far are safe. Now, what is interesting in all of this is, you remember in the old days, the US and also the Zionists kept using the label of terrorist, right? Whoever they do not like is a terrorist. Now, in the past few years, the Emirates got the same book and they read from it. So they called the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists. And in 2017, the Emirates issued a declaration of calling 50 organizations around the world terrorist organizations. Among those terrorist organizations were CARE, MAS, ISNA. This is just to tell you that they are not really talking about terrorists, they are talking about anybody who's calling for Islam. Now, they got eventually the Saudis on board, and the Saudis start calling Al-Ikhwan Muslimin a terrorist organization. Although Al-Ikhwan Muslimin for 30 years plus they were having and living on Saudi money. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Their institution were supported by the Saudis, just like the Salafi movement in this regard. So now the Saudis are using Al-Ikhwan in Yemen to fight the people that are being backed by the United Arab Emirates. And that's why those who follow social media, you have seen, the Emirati, those people who are on social media basically saying, how come you are now supporting the terrorists? How come you are using the terrorists and this and this and that? And of course, Saudis, it's not that Ibn Salman waked up and started loving the Muslim Brotherhood. He just realized that he needs someone to fight the Emirates' influence in Yemen, and the only force that is there is really organized is Al-Islah, the party of Al-Islah, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, and some tribes here and there. So that's unfortunately where things have come, that the Ummah's wealth, the weapons that they buy, is going to fight each other. Remember, we discussed a few weeks ago that the Emirates have bought $3 billion worth of weapons from where? From where? From Israel. From Israel. That the Emirates bought $3+ billion worth of weapons from Israel. Now, this weapons for what? It's to be sent to Libya to support Haftar, to be sent to the Sudan to support the Rapid Force, which are also doing genocide and tremendous amount of crimes against the Sudanese people, and in Yemen. So at least in Yemen now they are being routed out, and the Saudis realize that they cannot just let things go. Unfortunately, they waked up too late, because the price sometimes will be high when you wait until the problems, become larger and larger and larger. That's why also there is this issue of Israel recognizing the Somaliland. There's a small part that is called Somaliland. For those who do not know the history of Somalia, Somalia had French influence from the colonial time. They have British influence. They have Italian influence. So there was big fight over Somalia in the old days. Why? Because again, Somalia is across the Bahr al-Arab, the Arab Sea, from Yemen. And if you are there, you can really control the trade, control the ships, control whatever comes, because it's very, very strategic area. So suddenly this Somaliland, which became an entity after the collapse of Somalia in 1991, from 1991 until now, really Somalia did not have a stable government. But basically the Somaliland is a strip that has a strategic position. The Emirates control the port of Berbera in the Somaliland. And the Israelis came and said, we recognize Somaliland as an independent country. No country in the world recognizes Somaliland. Everybody says Somaliland is part of Somalia, period. Now, the vice chairman of Tel Aviv University, he's an Orientalist, he said, you need to understand that we are not, meaning Israel, the only ones in there. The Emirates are there, and the Emirates are putting the money and the effort in there. So basically he's saying that we are working with the Emirates and the Somaliland to try to control Somaliland. Why this is the case? Because Turkey, for one, is trying to have bases in that area, to have influence in that area. And in the absence of Egyptian influence, Egypt used to be very influential in that area. Egypt now basically, you do not hear about Egyptian influence. They have been now coordinating even with Turkey, although they do not like Turkey in this regard, because they do have a mess on their west in Libya because of the civil war. They have a mess in the south, Sudan, because of the civil war, and they have also Gaza on the east. So Egypt cannot really make up their mind. In fact, in the issue of Yemen, they are just issuing statements. That was not the case. Qatar, believe it or not, is also playing a role in the Somalia, the mainland Somalia, by supporting the Shabab, because they have also their own interest in Africa. Iran is trying to have some foothold in Africa too. So you can see, unfortunately, that this fragmented ummah, we are paying a heavy price in terms of people, in terms of resources, in terms of even ability to make a difference, because the way that this thing is designed is to have inner fighting and keep the ummah fragmented. And this really pleases the West and the Zionists in Palestine. It was said that part of why the Israelis have recognized Somaliland is to try to get a foothold in there, try to get Somaliland to accept Palestinians when the time comes that they want to remove them from Gaza. I mean, they have tried in the past to reach others, in this regard. Somaliland, of course, they said that's not the case, but why in the world would you be interested in dealing with the Zionists in this regard? What is it that they get? The Israelis are not going to put the money in this regard. But there's no doubt that there's coordination between the Emirati and the Zionists in the Somaliland. The thing that is the funny thing is Netanyahu asked Trump to recognize Somaliland. So in public, Netanyahu said, does anybody know where is Somaliland? Where is Somaliland? I mean, he was sarcastic, of course. I'm sure he did not even hear of the word Somaliland before that. So, he really belittled this, and there's not much of an interest in the U.S. to try to get into this. So that's where the situation in Yemen interact with the issue of the Somaliland, because if the Zionists will get a base in Somaliland, they have an easy way to hit on the Houthis. Because remember, whenever they want to attack the Houthis, they have to fly about 1,000 kilometers to get to hit the Houthis, 1,000 plus kilometers. Now it's across the Arab Sea, if they have a base in there. And as we know, Saudi, Egypt, and mainly Turkey express very alarmed on that situation, and remain to be seen where this thing will be heading. Now to Iran. The Iranian government over the years is Iran is very rich in oil, very rich in resources, very rich also in human resources. They have about 100 million people or so. And they have lots of oil in this regard. And they have failed miserably in trying to improve the life of the people for many reasons. Some of those reasons are obvious to many. They have put so much wealth into their own strategic thinking of controlling Arab countries. So they have put so much money in Lebanon. They have invested so much money in Iraq. They have put so much money in Sudan over the years. They have, put so much money with the Houthis. They have put about more than $800 million in Africa. So they thinking of themselves that we want to have clout, we want to have power, we want to have reach, comparing themselves, of course, to Turkey and to the Zionists in Palestine. But this was at the expense of the standards of living for the people. Not to mention that the Ayatollahs are also getting rich when the average person in Iran is struggling. So what happened in the last 10 days or so is the Iranian rial plunged. $1 now bring 42,000 rials. Can you imagine? $1 bring 43,000 rials. So you can see that this is at the level of the currency for Syria and Lebanon. That currency is not worth much. But Syria has gone through all these years of the Assad and family stealing the wealth of the Syrian people. And Syria does not have the wealth that Iran has. Lebanon has this crisis of the banks, where the banks were running a Ponzi scheme. And at one point, this thing exploded in their face, and people could not even get their money. Imagine, could not get your money that's in the bank. I mean, we have instances of people taking a machine gun to the bank and telling the teller, I want to have $1,000 from my own account, because they did not allow for one point people to go and withdraw, and then they limited to $200 a month. So people will go with machine guns and give me money from my account. It's not somebody who's trying to rob a bank. As a result of that crisis, the lira in Lebanon really reached very bottom. So Syria and Lebanon can be explained, but Iran with those wealth, now they will come and say, well, we have an embargo. Well, yeah, you have an embargo, but everybody knows who follow, they used to send trucks from Tehran to Istanbul full of pure gold. You have those big 18-wheelers full of gold, so that they will pay, because they were kicked out of the banking system, just like Syria was kicked out of the banking system, the so-called SWIFT banking system. They tried also to kick Russia out of it, but they realized that if they kick Russia, they cannot get oil and gas, natural gas, to Europe. So they get few banks out of the SWIFT system, but they could not deal with the whole thing with Russia. So when this thing have a plunge in the currency, basically, the people who lost the most are the merchant. Because imagine somebody who owns, those bazaars. I mean, the bazaar in Iran carries lots of weight historically. So imagine a bazaar guy who have, let's say $100,000 in the bank. What's worth to be $100,000 in Iranian currency? And overnight, you have less than $10,000. So it was a disaster of a big proportion. So what they did is they closed the shops in the bazaar, and they had the demonstration of saying, basically, we cannot live like this. Inflation hit 40%. University students joined in, and then the Iranian regime started shooting live. Some Iranian law enforcement also were killed, and some of those demonstrators were killed. Pompeo, who used to be the U.S. Secretary of State, wrote on X saying basically he's in support of those Iranians that are walking, and beside them walking the Mossad agents. And this is not far from the truth, because the Israelis have played a role. They have, and we talked about this in detail last time, infiltrated the Iranian regime at different levels in different cities. The president of Iran came and said that those demonstrators have a legitimate concern, and it needs to be addressed. After a few days of demonstration and trouble, and yesterday, this was like after now a week of this, the Ayatollah came and said they need to be addressed. But he said we need first to get those people who are making the trouble, arrest them and hold them and punish them. But Iran is realizing, and it's too late, maybe, in this regard. Not that Iran, the regime will change soon. No, Iran is very firm. They have different levels. If those demonstrations happen in Arab countries, it would have come to a halt. I mean, imagine the bazaar, the university, and then the people in general are in the streets in different cities. If it was in Arab countries like Egypt, that would have been a major threat. But Iran is intact. They have really designed the system such that the loyalty of the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij and all those, the old Mukhabarat, all that is intact in this regard. So it would be, looks like the way it is that they would need to give concessions, maybe make subsidies, and maybe get this wealth that, I mean, the Ayatollahs are sitting on lots of wealth. You have all those institutions that are supported by tens of billions of dollars in Iran. Now, for example, in Syria, they are out of Syria. In Lebanon, they are not like before. They are not fighting in this regard. But they have to give in. And given they have to use some of that wealth that they have used to support their currency and basically give some concessions, some subsidies to basic things that the people need in this regard. But it's very interesting that Iran has spread chaos in the Arab capitals for the past 20 years, and now they are paying a price for putting so much money in spreading that mess in Syria, in Iran, in Sudan, and beyond, and now they are paying for it. Similarly, they have put their nose, when Armenia and Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan fought. Azerbaijan are Shiite. Imagine Iran stood on the side of Armenia because Azerbaijan, their land extend, and they claim a good part of the Iranian land that it's theirs. But for their credit, they spend so much also to improve on their defenses, and we have seen this during the war with the Zionists in this regard. Shifting to Venezuela, when Trump came, he mentioned that he's going to change the Department of Defense to the Department of War. You remember that? And that was not something that was to be taken lightly. Although at that point it was not seen that there is something imminent that is coming. So when they start bombing those boats, saying that they carry drugs and this and that, there was starting some alarm of where this thing is heading. But when they start pulling military resources from the Gulf, from the Middle East, and from China, and putting it close to the Caribbeans and this and that, it became clear that there is something more. So he started threatening Venezuela, basically threatening Maduro that you need to leave. And it looks like there was some discussion about him going to Turkey. And he did not really took this thing serious. He was still dancing the other day. I mean, you have seen him dancing as if nothing is there. And he said, let's negotiate and this and that. And the world was surprised, including the U.S. itself, when yesterday morning people waked up to statements from Trump that we had hit Venezuela militarily, and we captured Maduro and his wife, and we are, we brought them to the one of the their airplane carriers in that area through a helicopter, and from there he was transferred to New York to be held in court because, again, the same old thing that he's accused of drug smuggling and looking over a drug industry and this and this and that, which basically is baseless in this regard because Venezuela does not really play that much of a role in bringing drugs to the U.S. And if you read, the U.S. itself, from the New York Times to NPR to others, they will just say that that's not a case in this regard. Plus, in the past few weeks, the U.S. under Trump had freed. He gave amnesty. Basically, somebody was in prison, the former president of Honduras. He let him go free, although he was accused by the U.S. government and imprisoned for 45 years for bringing 400 tons of drugs to the U.S. 400 tons. And then, somebody, of course, got money and went to Trump from his circles, just forgive him, he's out. Then a Mexican general, also accused of drug smuggling, Trump let him go. Another Salvadorans also accused of all those people are in prison. And basically, Trump told them, you are free to go. So it's not a question of drugs. So what is it? It has to do with oil. The biggest reserve, the biggest oil reserve in the world is in Venezuela. Imagine, they have oil for the next 100 years. The US would run out of oil soon. Between Venezuela and Saudi, they control 35% of the world reserve. Venezuela itself is almost 19% of the world reserve is in Venezuela. And that's basically is why this thing took place. And this is not what I am saying. Trump have said it. He said soon some people within this country, they will become very, very rich because basically they will control the oil of Venezuela. He said some people in this country. He also talked about that country, but he said in this country. So it's clear what is the objective in this regard. But what is happening is really confusing because Trump is saying we're gonna run Venezuela. However, all the soldiers, the US soldiers came out, so there are no soldiers on the ground. What do you mean we will run Venezuela? We will have a transition period, we will run Venezuela, and then we will go to the second stage. Remember Gaza, the first stage and the second stage in this regard. So what is it that he's talking about? He's not talking about direct rule, because he, for one, have been against nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan. They have spent trillions of dollars. Many Americans were killed, and it did not go anywhere. And what they are talking about is basically the vice president of Maduro now, this lady Rodriguez, is in charge by the court's order there. And Rubio today made it a little more clear. Basically, we're going to tell her, this is what you need to do. If she listens, she cooperates with us, we'll get the American companies to take over the oil, and things are okay. If she refuses, then we know how to deal with her. Now, this is the story of why and what. Where this thing is heading is really very, very unpredictable. The fact that a country like the US, that have the power, will go to a country that does not have much of a defense, like Venezuela, and put its troops in there and kidnap the president, send some serious signals to other countries in the Central and South America. Also sending signal to a country like Cuba, and not to mention other leaders around the world, that now you are dealing with this Department of War, and they are ready to do war. Because we discussed before that one of the philosophies that they had in this country is bring the money from Saudi, from Qatar, from the Emirates, now from Venezuela and other countries here. And Trump keep talking about $21 trillion of investment that he secured for the US. And of course, you cannot really trace this thing. I mean, we can talk about 8 trillion, 9 trillion, 21 trillion, where are they? Where they are coming. But part of it is why Saudis have so much wealth. Why Emirates why Qatar have so much, why Venezuela have so much wealth. This thing needs to come here. The US is the strongest country in the world, the strongest power in the world, and we will need to use this power to get the wealth to this country. That's basically really the picture when it comes to Venezuela. So basically, give the American oil companies total control, because until now, Venezuela was selling and trading mainly with oil, with China, with Iran, and among others. So now they need to deal with the US. The US will sell this oil. The US will trade this oil. You need to deal with oil. You need to have grants. Now, what is the main challenge is that you need so much money to really bring the oil industry in Venezuela really to a level where it will produce much oil. Because it's not really, because of the embargo, they do not really have up to date on many of these facilities, and it's going to cost not less than $35 billion. It's now a question of who's going to pay for it in this regard. It does not surprise me that they will get some other countries to put the money, saying basically a joint investment, but at the end it will be the US who will take the money. And there were very strong signals of warnings from Rubio to Cuba specifically and others that we are watching, be aware. This is very dangerous to the whole world, and very dangerous to this country, because it just put, first of all, the image of this country in a much darker compared with before. Especially, we have seen the putting limitation on immigration, getting ICE to deport so many of those people who are here under the impression that those guys, or under the reasoning that they are criminals and this and that, which is not really the case. Many of those really did not commit any crime. And along the same line, along the same philosophy, we have seen also some signs that are consistent with what Trump was saying, that he does not want people from Africa, and calling the people in Africa some names that I would not use here in this regard. The Department of Homeland Security have put a picture which was taken from a Japanese artist that shows a very beautiful scene. They said, this is the United States when we're going to deport 100 million people. Okay? Who are the 100 million people that they're going to deport? I mean, there's only 25 million naturalized Americans. And the 100 million is 1/3 of this country almost. And who are those 1/3? Well, there's no doubt, clear who are they. The blacks and the Hispanics. They account for 1/3. So basically, and it's on their, it's on their Facebook, you can see it. I mean, it's all over the place, that the US will be free of third world influence when we deport 100 million people from the US. So we are not talking about those people who are here without papers. Inshallah, for the sake of time, let me shift to Gaza. And the Gaza issue became prominent basically last week when Netanyahu came and visited Trump in Florida. We have seen Trump showering Netanyahu with lots of praise, and Netanyahu showering Trump with lots of praise, satisfy the ego of each one of them. But one interesting thing is when Trump said, if it was not for Netanyahu, Israel will not exist. And the former national security advisor in Israel, who is the general who put this general plan, the plan of the generals to control Gaza, basically suffocate them, no food, no medicine, no this, and then occupy the whole Gaza. You remember the general plans. We talked about it before that Netanyahu tried to use it at the end. He had an interview. He said, Israel is not safe because of Netanyahu. Israel did not remain because of Netanyahu. He said Israel remained because of two mistakes. One mistake by the Ayatollah in Iran, and the other mistake by Nasrallah in Lebanon. That's what he said. This is the National Security Advisor of Israel, former one, who again was so respected, coming up with the general, the plan of the generals. He said, if Hassan Nasrallah got Hezbollah to enter northern Israel, in 2 hours or so, they will be able to control Haifa. Haifa has the whole Israeli Navy. And he said if they advance a little more to the south, they will control the most important military base. You remember on October 7, Hamas controlled 3 main military bases and destroyed them around Gaza, and they controlled 21 military points. 3 major military bases around Gaza. So he's saying if Hezbollah have done the same, and the Ayatollah sent 200 directed missiles at sensitive area, he said Israel would have collapsed, and there will be no longer Israel. Very, very interesting. It's a long interview to be read to understand really that this image that has been going to this country, they are bombing Syria and bombing Lebanon and bombing Gaza and bombing the West Bank and bombing Iran and bombing Qatar and bombing Yemen. They were on the verge of collapse, total collapse. According to, this is the National Security Advisor. We are not talking about Arab news in this regard. But they gave the impression after the meeting that they are in total agreement, but there are some differences. And this is not the case. No, there were some major differences. Trump wants to move into the second stage, and Netanyahu is saying, no, we have, first of all, to get Hamas disarmed. And the Israeli establishment now is fearing that Trump does not have a priority of disarming Hamas. And Trump is talking now to Pakistan to bring troops into Gaza. And Pakistan have made it clear to the people there, because they know that if they went to Gaza, people would look at them to be, what's your task? So they made it clear, we are not going to go to Gaza to disarm Hamas. And they start criticizing the Israelis for violating the ceasefire. The only country so far that's very serious about putting troops is Turkey. And Netanyahu said no to Turkey. Trump says yes to Turkey. And this is yet another obstacle to the second stage. At one point, the US government said we have 50 organizations, 50 countries that are part of this, and everybody wants to be. That's not the case. They are struggling to get people on board. The Muslim countries are reluctant because, again, they cannot answer to their own people, what is your task in Gaza? Are you going to disarm Hamas? Are you going to start fighting with Hamas on behalf of the Zionists? That's a major sticking point. Of course, part of the agreement of Gaza was to open the Rafah crossing. And Netanyahu keeps saying, oh, there's still one remain body dead in Gaza. Hamas have to bring it up. And Hamas saying, look, they gave all the living, they gave all the dead. There's one that they cannot locate. Because Gaza is under a huge destruction in this regard. So until he came to Florida, he's saying basically, Rafah crossing will remain closed. Trump got him, you need to open it. I think this was a major outcome out of the meeting. So now within days, it's expected that the Rafah crossing to Egypt, between Gaza and Egypt, will open in both ways, meaning people can leave to Egypt and can come from outside Gaza. We are talking about Gaza, not just anyone. Another major development in Gaza is that the Israeli government announced more than 30 organizations that are doing humanitarian work in Gaza. They from now on will not be allowed. Among them is Doctors Without Borders, UN agencies and other agencies that really will be a disaster upon disaster to to the people of Gaza. And the UN and other countries have condemned this. To what extent this will be applied would remain to be seen. But this is a serious development, that the Israelis want to control not just what gets in Egypt, in Gaza, they want to control the humanitarian aspect, and they want to tell those organizations what they can and what they cannot do. Now take into account that nothing gets into Gaza without the Israeli agreement. Nothing. I mean, talk about food, talk about medicine, talk about supplies, talk about tents. Absolutely nothing gets without their agreement. It's now a logistics of what needs to be done to open the Rafah, because Trump said you need to open it. The main issue would remain, what is it going to the second stage? And that really is still up in the air. Who will be coming? Because if Turkey comes, other countries will come. Because they could just hide behind Turkey, whatever Turkey does, since Turkey will play a major role. And as we said, the Israelis are saying Qatar and Turkey, they cannot come in. And that remains to be seen which one goes. Now, there is a small chance that Trump would lose interest, because really dealing with, it's like just pulling teeth, dealing with Netanyahu and company. And for obvious reason, he does not want to come in public and criticize Netanyahu. Netanyahu is very, very careful to keep, making him happy. So he came and said, we're going to give you the Peace Prize, which is the best, highest level of prize in Israel. And of course, Trump would love having another prize from FIFA and the Israelis and what have you. I doubt now the Nobel Prize will come after invading, Venezuela in this regard, although, there are people who keep saying it, that they support him in this regard. Where this thing will be heading with Gaza is really uncertain. Definitely the Americans have a plan in this regard, and it's not a priority to disarm Hamas. So what Trump made a statement to please Netanyahu, I'm going to give Hamas 2 months to disarm. Okay, if they do not disarm, then what? Is the U.S. going to send Delta Force the way that they sent to Venezuela? It's not going to work. Are they going to come and ask Turkey to do it? It's not going to happen. So basically this issue would linger, because it's not, at least in the foreseeable future, what Netanyahu is pushing is to resume the war. One word before we finish on the West Bank. It was evident that there was a conflict between the two sides in private about this violence in the West Bank. We have discussed this before. Basically, the settlers in the West Bank have terrorized the population in the West Bank. They have killed people, they have burned houses, they have burned cars, they have cut so many olive trees, and olive trees, it takes long time to get the trees to give produce. They start cutting those as a punishment. They start stealing the sheep, the flock of people in this regard. So they have terrorized the West Bank, and even now countries around the world, international organization, saying basically this government is allowing this to happen. Netanyahu came and gave a big lie. I mean, it was a huge lie. He said, no, the ones who are doing this are 70 youth. He said there are about 70 youth doing this. And of course, it was utter nonsense. Yes, there were few of people who are teenagers doing this because they have the army to protect them. They go and cut trees and burn olive trees and burn houses and this and that. But there are many of those old, in terms of age, settlers who are doing this mess in the West Bank. And that was the excuse that Netanyahu gave in public, because it was evident that was discussed, and that Trump said you need to put a limit to this. But again, there was nothing criticism in public. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the khair and the good for the ummah, give hidayah for the rest, and make, inshallah, this year the ummah in a much better situation than what we have last year. Allahumma ameen. Inshallah, we'll close with this. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Inshallah, we need to be out of here by 9 o'clock, so we have a few minutes, inshallah, to leave. Jazakumullahu khair.